morning, everybody. This is Prasad Chaku here. I'm addressing you from Ahmedabad in Gujarat. Welcome to the Solidarity Series webinar, The Conversations During Lockdown and Beyond. Hope that you will have a very productive time understanding the issues pertaining to Corona and the issues emerging out of this pandemic. Today's topic is how we are addressing Adivasi and Dalit exclusion and COVID relief. Before coming to that, I would just bring to your attention a few things. This disaster, like any other disaster, there is a theory that disasters are faceless, they don't discriminate among people and so on. Yes, it is true, disasters happen. It may be due to human interventions, it may be due to failures of the system, but nevertheless, disaster is something which may not discriminate among people, but it's people who discriminate among people. During disasters, we have always seen, as National Dalit Watch, which monitors the condition of the most marginalized communities during disasters, we have always seen that disasters magnify discrimination and magnify exclusion. And we found that all those who are previously vulnerable, all those who are victims of an unfair, unjust system, particularly those who are discriminated on the basis of caste, on the basis of gender, age, ability, or any such attribute, they are always more prone to the deleterious impacts of disaster. And as a result, we have always found that we've had to target our interventions to mitigate their suffering and to improve and alleviate their conditions. So it is also important to see Corona, the COVID-19, from this perspective. We see that as this virus spreads all around the world and to a great extent in India too, we find that there is tremendous suffering. There is the economic lockdown, but the impact of the virus is not the same among all the communities, just as any other disaster. I think that's one of the aspects that I'm sure our speaker today will be focusing on. And keeping this in mind, I would introduce today's speaker, my senior colleague, Paul Divakar. Paul Divakar is fairly well known to most of us who work in the social sector. He has been an advocate for Dalit rights. He has headed a movement called Dalit Arthik Adhikar Andolan, which is a part of the national campaign on Dalit human rights, of which he is a founding member. He serves as the chairperson of the Asia Dalit Rights Forum and also the convener of the Global Forum on Discrimination Based on Work and Descent. His contribution in getting caste discrimination and caste-based exclusion recognized at international level is something that we need to acknowledge. He has been actively engaging with the communities in strengthening access to justice. And he has worked on the intersectionality of gender and caste. And through the Arthik Adhikar Andolan, he has highlighted the need for financial accountability and transparency, particularly when it comes to allocations in public budgets. All of you who may have followed public budget and analysis would have definitely come across Paul Divakar, who has established over the past decade or so the tremendous injustice in allocations of public budget as far as Dalit and Adivasi communities are concerned. Paul has been voted as one of the 50 most influential Dalit leaders in the country. He has led campaigns on Dalit economic rights, Vadana Thore Abhiyan, and sustainable development goals related efforts nationally and internationally. And he has also served on the board of Amnesty International. Extremely happy and proud to introduce Paul Divakar to all of you. Over to you, Paul Divakar. And just one more reminder, please keep your mics muted. The speaker would take about 20 minutes today, and following which you will get some time for questions and answers. Questions and answers can be, the people can raise their hands and ask questions, or otherwise a better way would be to send in questions over chat, and we would take some of those questions, and the speaker, as well as if there are others in the audience who are familiar with this theme, they would also be allowed to interact on this issue. Thank you. Over to you, Paul Divakar.
Thank you very much, Prasad, for an extensive, detailed thing about me. I think a lot of it is what you say, like these huge hordes that you see on the roadside, they're just names and nothing else. And really, we see that in the COVID, when everything's actually come to a grinding halt, and we really do not know where and how this whole pandemic is going to be. But Jai Bhim to you all. I think it's a very difficult time at this to celebrate Baba Saheb, but I think the spirit of Baba Saheb is not to be let down or unnecessarily exclude ourselves or depress ourselves, but continue to be resilient and challenge these difficult times. I think many of us, to a certain extent, are quite well protected, working at home. We have sufficient bank balances. I think somehow we can go and get what we need. We can even stockpile things for at least a month or two. But many of our sisters and brothers, especially the focus of whom we are taking it today, the distressed migrants. I don't want to use the migrants because I'm also a migrant. I'm from Andhra Pradesh. I've come here and I'm counted as a migrant in the census. But this is not the migrants we're talking about. We're talking about the distressed migrants, those who are forced due to famine, due to caste violence, due to all forms of difficulties, both natural by the society, are forced to eke out living in search of just a livelihood. And they come to the cities, or some of them go elsewhere to other places. Many of them are now working under huge mega projects, whether it's in Kerala, whether it's in Punjab, whether it's in different parts of the society. And that is what we are seeing. And this whole session will try to focus on how are we addressing the concerns of these communities. Before I go to this, I think all of us have already done it, I'm sure, but I would like to once again place our complete dissent and condemn the cancellation of bail for Dr. Anand Teltumde and Advocate Gautam Navlakha, who have voiced their sheer concern for the poor and the marginalized. And I propose that we all join the wide stream of protests that are going around as they present themselves. I do not know, somebody said they're already on the way, especially Anand is trying to around 12 o'clock at the Sessions Court in Mumbai. I think this is a grave shadow on the way the democracy is turning out to be, despite the COVID. I mean, is this what that they'll have to focus on? They don't have any other work. These are the people who have been voicing the concerns. And anyway, that's the thing. But I'm right thankful for CFA for bringing this very lively series. I have been following the series and I found it extremely informative, and I hope I'll try to stand up to the benchmark that has been set. I would like to place before you a proposition. Most of you might agree that the differential layer on which the COVID is affecting has to be taken note of, especially on the Dalits and Adivasis, many of whom, as we know, have been forced to distress migration, and they are not in their places. They don't have protection. Some of them dare to walk hundreds of kilometers to find a place. And therefore, to question ourselves, are we addressing this in the way that we ought to? We missed an opportunity during the freedom struggle when Baba Saheb has rightly said, come on, it's not just political freedom that we should fight for. And this is, all of us know, the kind of conversation he had with Mr. Karamchand Gandhi, saying that you just cannot only talk about the political freedom. When will you bring out the social freedom? When will you bring the foundation of the social justice? Where is the dialogue? Where is the counting of these people? And when the British have come to really count these identities, you started a huge campaign telling them, go away, you're splitting our country. The same thing is again going to come here. And I heard in many instances, when people have raised this, they are being condemned, saying that don't bring divisions. Now, is this the way that we are again going to build a nation? And COVID, I think, is not going to be business as usual. All of us know it. We really do not know the real complications of it. I think somehow people like us will get by. But isn't this another opportunity that all of us, how do we not only visualize, how do we instill the seeds of inclusion, and not just inclusion as a charity, but because we believe in social liberty, we believe in fraternity, and we believe that is the base of our democracy. There is a thinking that is going that this COVID disaster does not see rich or poor. There is no haves and have-nots. It has affected everybody equally. And recently we had several of these discussions. I'm also part of this Sustainable Development Goals, not just here, but also in South Asia, Asia Pacific region. And when I was telling them that this is the predicament of some of the traditionally intergenerationally marginalized communities, there was a huge outcry. And they were saying that you cannot say at this time, when everybody is being affected, that you can't say somebody is privileged and they are the ones who are to be affected. They're being affected. Don't unnecessarily divert this. At a time like this, don't bring in issues of discrimination. Don't bring in, these are things that are there. We will handle them. But sorry, I think we need to have strategies. If we don't have strategies separately for the vulnerable communities or those that are socially excluded, I think we cannot have a post-COVID India. We will still build on the same fissures that have fractured our country. And you realize, I think more than any other time, all of us realize that without the immense nation building hard work of these people who are construction workers, who are sanitation workers, many of them are nurses, many of them are aides in the mortuaries and in other places, hospitals. They are Safai Karmacharis, they are the ones, who do all the muck that we leave it aside. And they're the lowest paid. Without their contribution, I don't think India can grow. And that's the slavery that we want to perpetuate. But here, I think we'll have to take a relook. One, there is nothing far from the truth that it affects everybody equally. I think that is something that we'll have to very clearly. I mean, we've known even in normal disasters, the location of a person, not just social location, the physical location of a person or a family or a habitation. And you know, in our country, even today, habitations are segregated, they separate. You will have all the facilities up to the Uru. Uru in Telugu, we call it Uru, or main village, and the Wada, which is the place where the colony, the Dalits live. They won't have the minimum facilities. The road connections are not there. And this is there everywhere, right from Jammu. I do not know about Kashmir, but definitely Jammu I've seen, and right from Assam to Kanyakumari and to Mumbai, you have the same situation. And when location is very critical for the way a disaster affects, you know, they're in the most vulnerable areas. They are the lowest areas where if it's a flood, they get affected. They are most of the time living near the dump areas. Many of them are juggi jopadi. They just put a plastic sheet and then on the government space. I think all of us know it. I see the names of all of you here, and most of us have actually fought for these people. And when disasters come, it is these people who are affected more. I mean, at the initial stage, it's a very different scenario where this particular corona has come from the transporters, but it's no guarantee. And now we see that it's going to spread into the areas which are not able to maintain physical distance. I don't want to use the social distance because, you know, most of us have been subjected to the social distance in the name of untouchability and purity pollution for ages. So we are against using the word the social distancing. So both in their location as well as in their basic way in which they're exposed to this pandemic, it is Dalits and Adivasis who have, and of course the lower backwards minorities in many countries, because our country does not recognize those Dalits and Adivasis, yes, but those Dalits who have converted to either Muslim or Christianity, which I think is anti-constitutional, but anyway, that's a different thing. But many of the minorities, Dalits, Adivasis, lower bases, are located in an area which are affected much, much more just by their physical location. And then there is a social location where they face many barriers in access to relief. And now, as we are doing as part of the National Dalit Watch, around 3,000 volunteers across the country, trying to see that the inclusion monitoring takes place. And we know that whenever such pandemic or a disaster takes place, I'm sorry, not pandemic, but disaster takes place, there is this chance that they are not able to access as freely, and there are barriers that they have to overcome, and therefore there needs to be a special facilitation of how they can be removed. So they are facing barriers in access. In many instances, the PDS shops are not distributing rice to them, and when they ask, there is a break of violence. The ration cards are not kept with them. In accessing the other schemes, also able to access as freely as it would have it. So when, therefore, we recognize that at least there's one study that has been brought up that 40 to 47% of those who are involved in distress migration are scheduled castes. And I'm sure there is a similar proportion of scheduled tribes, and definitely of Muslims and some lower BCs. So these communities are not only affected, but the relief doesn't reach them. They work, they are forced to work. I think this we have seen in most of the places. Just walk around. Who are the people on the road now? They're cleaning. I'm surprised and shocked. I live in Noida. At midday, Safai Karma, people are cleaning the streets. What nonsense? Why do you want to do that? Can't you have machinery to do that? But Safai Karmacharis, because they're paid so less, and a contractor would have taken it, and he doesn't need to, or she doesn't need to go in and buy this big equipment. They are the ones. And we have seen how many of the doctors, but suppose who's talking about the nurses? Who's talking about the aides? And most of them would be from the lower BC or SC, ST communities, because others don't want to go into the nursing profession, except I think from Kerala. And they are the ones who are most exposed to this disease. Then ASHA workers, we've got several instances where ASHA workers do not visit the villages where the habitations where Dalits are. They do not spray the disinfectants that are needed at this time. And I have heard, in Atmakur, one of the mandals in Kurnool districts in Andhra Pradesh, a village of 1,000 families has been socially and economically boycotted because they refused to come under the landlord, the ready landlords, for work. And they said, we cannot risk our lives. So then they have been, not only the things they are facing an additional COVID social boycott. But before I begin, before I close, two things I would like to mention. This is not new only of our country. I was talking to colleagues in Hungary, in Italy, and in Europe, other places. Especially, we collaborate with those communities, Roma, Gypsy, Sinti, travelers, Manush. They are similar to that of the Dalit communities. And together, we are all calling ourselves as those for communities discriminated by work and descent. Similar things are happening to them, right from Ireland to Turkey to Russia. The existing criminalization, the existing discriminations that continue are highly accentuated during the period of COVID. And many of you would have also noticed in the US, the Afro-American communities, the blacks, are experiencing a similar thing. Tens and hundreds of bodies who are not being claimed by anybody, and most of them are belonging to the Afro-American communities, and they're given a mass burial. And if that is so, you can imagine the situation. So, National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights on 22nd has given an appeal to the Prime Minister, an appeal to the civil society, saying that we must ensure inclusion. First, let us monitor where are the spots, where are the possible spots that exclusion take place. Can we ensure that relief can be given? But we've also had reports where when relief is being directed to those communities, there are housing areas which said that, no, you don't decide that. We will decide. You give the rations to us and we will give it to whomever, and they will not give it to them. So, to be aware that the existing discrimination and the existing social restrictions that our society has been placed under are not just forgotten during the time of COVID, that we will have to struggle and will have to organize, educate, and also have specific tools to agitate in this time where COVID is going to have a devastating effect on all of us. I think CFA, I was listening to some of the series, Anjayati Ghosh and many of us, them saying that this is not comparable to any other, and it's going to have such an effect. And I think this is one, I don't want to call it an opportunity, but a space for us when we are rebuilding, when they're looking at post-COVID India. Can we have an India with social justice as its foundation, and also economic justice and development justice as we take forward? Jai Bhim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was really eye-opening, I should say, and has dwelled with a number of very serious and pertinent issues that emerged from this pandemic, this disaster, and has focused on the fact that the location of the people, the most vulnerable people, that determines the extent to which any disaster, and including this pandemic, corona pandemic, how it affects the most marginalized people, particularly the Dalits, the Adivasis, the minorities, and many other vulnerable groups like single women-headed families from among these communities, transgenders, and senior citizens, children. So we need to see any disaster from this prism of the location of the community, and he has placed it in a very universal kind of prism. And it's not, India is not the only country where this is happening. It is also happening in a very similar pattern in many other countries too, as he has put it. Now we are opening up the session for questions and answers. The best way of asking questions would be to type it into the chat box, and we would be selecting those questions and reading them out, and Paul could answer that then. Thank you. This is from Priya. Thank you, Paul, for the powerful presentation. As you and most of us are realizing, the impact of this crisis is doubly devastating for Dalits and other marginalized communities. And when we know that for this government would not prioritize their welfare, how do you think we need to prepare in the coming days to not just show solidarity, but to revive their livelihood?
Oh, thank you very much, Prasad. Thank you very much, Priya. I also have it on the screen. I don't think there is an easy answer, as you very well know. But one of the things that we are trying to do is first relook at our own. See, I also, as you know, with the civil society, with the organization National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights, and it's really we were thinking, how do we break these boundaries between the civil society organizations? Number one, how do we redefine our work? Because this is not the kind of work that we are used to in terms of relief and rehabilitation, but it's a very different thing. And after, I think it is going to continue in a very big way. So first, reorient ourselves that how can we be more relevant and meaningful to the demands and the situations, especially of these communities, number one. And once we are, I think that's the preparation that we're needed, because even I was thinking earlier, okay, it's a lockdown for about 3 weeks, and then business is going to be as usual. But now slowly it is dawning that business is not going to be usual. The way of tools of communication, of the way of working is going to change. So first, how do we prepare ourselves? And then how do we work? Because there are so many barriers, so many aspects. So we need to now really spread and collaborate and network much more stronger than at any other point that we have done. Secondly, these two are inward within ourselves that we need to do.
Thank you, Paul.
Sorry. And then externally, we need to visualize. We need to visualize where the exclusions are taking place, build a database, and then challenge and work with the authorities to make sure the discrimination is reduced or mitigated.
Thank you, Paul. You could actually look at the next question in the order by Srinidhi. How can we make sure that we as doctors, while creating awareness about corona and its diverse determinants, address specific issues of Dalit and Adivasis? Can you please share organizations, people, activists working in this area, whom we can contact and understand as well. Also create more awareness in general public. By Srinidhi.
I think the question itself has an answer. I think it is necessary for us not only to work with similar social activists or the administrators, authorities, but I think we need to really work with the whole chain of the health professionals to be there. I don't have much experience in this, but I'm sure we will do, and we really welcome people like Srinidhi and others if we can form some kind. Already, I'm sure there may be some. Earlier, we used to have Doctors Without Frontiers or something. Joe might know, but if there are such things, I think I would request CFA to see how a kind of a network can be formed, specifically focusing on some of the technical as well as the social activists and others who can come together to address this. Thank you very much, Srinidhi, for this very, very important aspect.
Thank you, Paul. The next question is from Nupur Rizbood. I hope I have not mispronounced it. Nupur, is the Indian or Hindu society or its people capable or equipped to understand social equality? The basic principle of the ideology is based on segregation.
I would like to actually resign myself to the fact that Nupur has said, but we can't afford to do that. Imagine the struggle that people like Ambedkar, Mahatma Phule, and several others have had just to challenge the slavery, casteism, discrimination. Yes. But if countries like US and countries so-called the developed nations are still having, so this is something that I think I'll have to first not accept, but be alert myself and ourselves once again that these are going to happen. And this is what, around 17th, when we had these instances within our country, we suddenly grouped a few of us, Prasad and few of us, and trying to see how we can respond to this. And there is going to be discrimination, there is going to be exclusion, and then there are going to be other barriers to the relief, as we have seen. So how can we prepare ourselves? So while I agree that it's a very challenging fact, and then in addition to it, the fascism that we are seeing, in addition to it, the communalism that is going around, it seems to be completely formidable, formidable and complex. But I think we can crack it. We can crack it because when I see our communities, despite lockdown, can you imagine that you have to walk 300 kilometers? They just lifted their bags and then put their children and said that we are going to walk. And I think we have to learn from the resilience of these communities. We will say no till we have Sama Samaj, not Brahmin Samaj, not Manu Samaj, not even a Dalit Samaj, a Sama Samaj, which is based on social justice. We cannot give up.
The next question is from Maju Varghese. We have seen discrimination and exclusion during tsunami, Oki, and other natural disasters. From the learning and interventions on these, how is COVID different, and what are the few points that need special attention?
I think COVID has similar features of exclusion, but I think the scale at which COVID is going to affect us and the several factors that are going to impact on us. So it's not just medical, it's not just the loss of your house or property, but it's the whole destruction of the livelihood. And we really do not know for how long. And then impending all this, combining this whole thing, I think it is just not 1 + 1, but I think it's really exponential. And that is why I think it is this time that all of us and all these forces in both the medical, technical, administrative, political, social activists. I think we need to come together to see, and we may have to walk 300 kilometers, which we are not used to. We may have to really chase these barriers. But our sisters and brothers there, they have shown us this is the way. And I think that is what is going to be very difficult and very different. And we need to be prepared for a long haul.
Another question from Malati. Taking the COVID crisis as an opportunity, would there be increased attacks on Dalits and Adivasi livelihoods by powers that be? How can we build resistance to the increased fascist attacks?
I really don't have a answer to the fastest attacks. If people like Anand Teltunde and Sudha and Gautam, if they are being hounded, how are our common people going to really withstand this? But then what I see is 2 days ago, an instance has been brought to us in Sharanpur in UP. There is a woman who has been approaching the ration dealer for 3 days. She has not been given, but then she knows that others have been receiving these rations. And then she goes to the Mukhya and asks, both the Mukhya and the ration dealer join together and then say, how dare you? And they start abusing. And she says, no, you better mind your tongue. And I will report this as an abuse, caste-based abuse. You're going to report on caste-based abuse. You might as well report on violence. So then they caught her hair, pushed her down, beaten her. But imagine the courage of this woman. She picks herself up, picks a few people around, and she goes to the police station and reports. The terrorizing that is going on, I think, is not going to stop, especially when you raise your voice. As far as you say accepting, it's not going to. What you and I face are very, 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 very limited, and I do not know. I mean, nothing compared to what they face on a routine basis. They're just terrorized, but the courage they're expressing. So therefore, what I'm only saying is, I think as long as we pick ourselves up, as long as we raise these questions, as long as we support one another, even at times if we are silent, I think there will be people like you, people like all of us, pick each other up and then continue to believe in democracy. If we can't believe in if we don't believe in democracy, I think I don't know. I mean, I don't know what else option is there, because with the might of the state at this stage and so many years of nationalism that we have seen, it is just not tenable. So we have to actually continue to build our base on democracy and the constitutional value and cover that to anybody who changes them.
Thank you. As some scholar has said, the solution to all problems of democracy is more democracy. So there's a question from Anil. What would be your thoughts on reverse migration in a way when we have seen a lot of migrants coming back to the villages, and given the fact that the caste situation in the villages, how will we address these upcoming discrimination in terms of relief, and also with the caste discrimination which is prevalent?
This is a thing that all of us will have to put our hands together. But what are the trends that we are seeing? After returning back, they are still being called to come back, because they know that without the human resources and the hard work of these communities, there is not going to be much of harvesting. Amrendra Kumar Amrendra Singh of Punjab has said that we've got a golden bountiful crop this time and we're going to harvest. And the question to him was, how are you going to harvest? We know in Punjab, all the people who are investing, who are involved in harvesting are all the migrant laborers. And you don't have that many harvesters to actually cover the entire harvest. So the question is, they are going to be exposed they're going to be exposed to severe forms of occupational hazard and pushing them, and how are they going to face this newer forms, because many of them we've talked to, they said now they don't want to go back. We thought we'll gain by going to this distress migration, but maybe there are aspects that we'll have to do. And I think this is one area we'll have to continue to see. I do not know whether small is beautiful and solutions are possible, because the scale at which we are looking at is something like, correct me if I'm wrong, it is something like 500, 600 million people who are involved. How are we going to do this? I don't know. I mean, I think this is something that we'll have to really explore, work with economists, and then see what policies we need to support.
Karthik Jaibhim, very similar to the question Nupur had asked earlier. Thank you, Paul. What is shocking is the extraordinary indifference that people of privilege have in India for the intense and pervasive levels of human suffering. What explains the absence of empathy and solidarity based on your experience?
I think we'll have to really increase our ability to network and ability to raise this with the authorities. If all of us take more and more responsibility to see wherever these issues of discrimination comes, that we mobilize our networks. I think that is one which is, because the more you visibilize, the more there is a chance of that itself as a protection. But then we've also seen the assertion always increases the violence against them. But that's a risk, I think, that we'll have to take. I don't know what protection is there for us, but I think again, visibility is the only kind of protection that we can seek for.
Very encouraging. It is a question from Ashok Chowdhury. Very encouraging presentation. In the given situation when Dalits, Adivasis, and Pasmanda and other marginalized people are and will face more distress, it is imperative to establish unity among the oppressed and excluded communities in order to assert their democratic and constitutional rights. How can the process of unity be accelerated? Strategy and common symbols.
That's what we are also struggling with, Ashokda. Thank you very much for raising this. I think we need to, at a time when we can't meet, at a time when so much of restrictions are there, can we have at least some specific responsibilities state-wise or region-wise to see how we can have a cell which can address many of this? I think there are several. Sphere is one organization we're trying to work through. Other networks are beginning to emerge. So I'm sure Ashok is already thinking of some, but I think CFA is also very at a vantage point to promote some of these. And I think we need to pick these threads and then see how we need to go ahead.
Question from Viraj. Thanks, Paul. Do you think the complete economic lockdown is justified, considering how it would lead to large-scale job losses and further lessening the opportunities available to Adivasis and Dalits for their upliftment? This is taking into consideration the 5% rate of mortality of COVID-19, which is lesser than many other diseases.
That's true. I think we have in India 1,400 people die of TB every day. Every day 1,400 people, and I don't think we have paid this kind of an attention. But of course, COVID is a different, because TB has not stopped the production, and TB only affects the most marginalized communities. So we have had instances, and I don't know. Somehow I'm not at all convinced of this kind of a lockdown. At least I thought today our PM will announce different stages. There is no discussion. There is no debate. I do not know if there is a debate, maybe with RSS or some other small group would have taken. But there is no transparent, we could not see any debate. What are the positive, what are the other options that the government has considered? How are they going to lift the flow of human resources to at least of workers to be able to start some of the processes? I don't think they have. If they have, then probably only the cronies might get. I don't know. So somehow with my lay knowledge, I don't think this is the economic model that will ease and slowly push forward while still restricting the spread of COVID. But yeah, I think these, I think let's see what are the best ways. But I think more important for me is, okay, if it's continuing, what is it that I'll have to do during the time of lockdown, and see that's possible.
Leo's question, in extending this lockdown, with his speech today, Narendra Modi finally mentioned Safai Karmacharis, but in the sense of their role as frontline workers, there was no acknowledgement of their social background, nor of the fact that majority are stranded due to the situation. This is also expected. Is this kind of political response an outcome of a fractured Dalit movement, which in normal times is difficult to bring together? And it appears even in this crisis, it has not come together to make a joint, if not common, pitch to ensure depressed communities concerned are foremost to decision making in a pandemic.
Yeah, I think you have brought out a very important point. I could not listen to the team's speech, but this is not the first time. He did the same thing with Swachh Bharat. He talked about Swachh Bharat, but he never talked about the people who are involved in, and our system, which has relegated a few communities to clean yours and my shit. And you know, and Swachh Bharat, though it has amassed huge amounts of money, has not still managed to eliminate the practice of Safai Karmachari, the manual scavenging. So he has used it, and I think this is one of the ways that they glorify and use. The same thing like what traditionally has been done by Ekalavya. You think that it is such a worst thing that anybody can ask as Guru Dakshina a thumb, right? But when I was narrating this story once, there was another group of people saying that that's a model we have to follow. That, of course, Guru Dakshina is very important and you need to give your thumb. But whose thumb it is? Who are the people who have to be forced into this frontline work to keep your house and my street, your street free? These questions. And I'm shocked that the educated people are still thinking that that is the way that we need to work. So, yes, I don't know whether it is the fissure of the Dalit movement, Leo. I would not be so eager to immediately come to the fissure and then say it is because of the differences within the Dalit movement. It is just that the spaces are not there. The spaces are very limited, and who is already informing? You have the president who is informing, who happens to be a Dalit. You have the other close people, but I think it is the Manuvadi ideology with which it is forcing, and we'll have to have other strategies to address this.
And Leo, you have the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has written a masterpiece on how Safai Kamdars go through a very sublime spiritual experience in their act of cleaning. That's for all of us to reflect on. The next question is from Bhagwan Keshbat. He's asking, how would Dr. Ambedkar have seen the current pandemic situation And how would he have addressed this question countrywide if he were alive today?
Sorry, if he was alive and if he was in power, you know that, no? He is the one who started the employment exchange. He initiated the finance commission. He was against the income tax for the lower communities. He was I mean, you know, several of these, the Reserve Bank ideas. I'm sure there had been a very very directive, decisive direction in which he would have handled. But however, I think the times are very different. Probably we also have a vacuum in the leadership, and this vacuum in the leadership is not just among Dalits, Adivasis, it is among the whole wider society. And it's not just in India. You see this breeze falling across from Brazil to US to Philippines to Hungary to Turkey. I mean, all these people, where is this going? And they are learning from one another. The Bolsonaros and the Trumps and the Modis are learning from one another. We are not able to, I think, put our link and seeing how is it that we can address. Maybe there are some groups who are doing probably in the northern countries. We have not done this together. We have not done this together nationally. We have not done this together across the southern nations. Like say those in Philippines are going through the same kind of a prime minister. In Brazil, the same kind of things. The reforms that have been brought are actually being pressed down, and so much of strictures on the CSO. So therefore, all of us will have to, claim ourselves the legacy of Baba Saheb and saying that we are no less, we have the power. Only thing is we need to continue to challenge this. We cannot give up. So I would look for Baba Saheb to direct. I would look for but then I cannot wish that he's here and then direct. I think if I do that, then I'm abdicating my own responsibility. And so that is something that I cannot afford to do.
The next question is by Vijayan. Do you have it on, are you in the same page as the questions? It's a long one, so perhaps you may need it on chat in front of you.
Yeah. So my question is regarding the strategizing that is required to mobilize the larger Dalit community, which today probably feels most vulnerable and violated, but also feel disempowered than at any other time before. When a PM addresses only those who can stand in the balconies and clap, it is evident that he is not having the oppressed Dalit community's majority in mind. So it is also likely that whatever little they get as rations, if at all, they will just feel the gratitude for government actions and so on. How do we go back to an empowerment model of right space from here? That's first. And the second question is, what is the future of oppressed people's political alliances, considering the impact COVID has had on resistance-based? I think Vijayan, this is the topic for the next CFA. I think we should really, I mean, I can't really, this is a very profound, and we really need to put our heads together. I really appeal to Joe and Priya and Maju and other colleagues. Vijayan, I can see you. Kindly, I think this is not a thing that I can, anybody, more than anybody, me. It's a very important question. And I think this is exactly the kind of questions we need to answer ourselves, we need to do. First, I would only say, we can't glorify victimization, number one, and we can't revel in victimization. The second, I think I cannot lose faith in seeing that the democracy is not going to work. And third, for me, asking rations is my right. It may be as important a right as a democratic right that we are fighting in a political sphere for, against strictures and others. But for that woman that I was mentioning today from Saharanpur, for her to go to the police station and then raise this, I think that is a fantastic witness that a Dalit woman has done. And that is because of her faith in the Constitution. So let's not forget that these traces are there. Though the co-option is going to take place, though for some equations, I think they may reap their votes, but I think they still have the satta to be able to challenge. But then your other question of how do we realign the political spaces, I think this is something that we need to really be thinking about now.
As government and civil societies are always framing policies for better social security and living condition of Adivasi and Dalit since the inception of this nation, but we never talk about the implementation part and procedure, which makes administrative agency and civil societies responsible and accountable for the implementation part. Now in such acute distress, what should be the debate regarding reform for implementation? Payal Rama.
So again, Payal ji, I have this story of this woman. I think she's really pushing for implementation. She knows most probably that SHO in that police station could be a dominant caste. She knows, but she's still asking for implementation of what has not been done despite all rules and despite all the legislative and constitutional measures. So I think, and some of us are also trying that. We have already gotten about 20,000 responses from different people across. We are in the form of collating, and we'd like to ask for this, exactly what you're saying. We need to have very clear implementation, and we are asking these at the district magistrate and what our magistrate or the collector, whatever you call that person, right up to collating them at the state level. And this is something that we are trying to do when gaps in administration, when gaps in relief and rehabilitation, when discrimination, and also violence, when atrocities, we're asking them to be filed. So I think we'll have to bring this. See, I think Janasaha's report, which you also would have seen, raises some of this. I must commend Asif for bringing this, but it's already been attacked by RSS and that magazine organizer, saying that where is he getting the money from? Why are they doing it? So I think as soon as we begin to raise, this thing will come. But I think as soon as we begin to raise, there is also a leverage that we are giving to that administrator and pricking her or his conscience, saying that you better, that's your role and that's your responsibility. And that, I think, is the only way at this particular time, till we can regroup and see what else we need to do.
The next question is from Pooja Parvati. It may be good, Paul, if you can have a look at it. Thank you, Paul, for the enriching presentation. COVID has surely made many of us reassess or reprioritize our advocacy. Do you also think that at this juncture, analyzing the budgets will bolster our efforts, particularly since there is definitely going to be a significant drop in the government spends, coupled with the dismal state of the economy? Some useful suggestions were made on making some shifts, like those suggested by economists, Sonia Gandhi, etc. In some senses, it also makes us move to more fundamental aspects, such as ensuring provision of basic entitlements and government being the primary spender for basics, such as healthcare. How do we reorient ourselves?
Thank you, Pooja. Pooja is the director of the International Budget program for India, and I think they have made a tremendous contribution to holding states accountable for the implementation of the budgets along with the CBGA and others. We're also closely working with them. No, I think it is only emphasized that without budgets and without the underpacking of the allocations, with allocations and necessary provisions, no amount of policy is going to make a difference to the people on the ground. And this is what we have seen here. And so I think we'll have to have very clear and sharp messaging and discuss these together. I don't think, I mean, there is a choice. One choice is make it so radical that it looks very good, but it will never be implemented. But make it also in some way that you can actually pierce it with with just that enough of crack to get in, and then blow it up later. I don't know which is a better practice, but I think we need to put our heads together and look at the allocations, look at the, I mean, if you look at the budgets, especially for the SCs and STs, tuppence, nothing actually. They say this whole thing of 83,000 crores and all that, but when you look at 83,000 crores, it is less than 23,000 crores in this year's February budget that they have given. And that is also, half of it is not spent. So there is a gap in the approved budget and the spent actual budgets. There is a gap in the policy and the allocations. So in effect, what the SC and STs and other marginalized communities get are just figures, and they're just left and right diversions that are taking place. So I think this is more important than ever that Pooja has pointed out. We need to make very clear, not cliches, not some kind of sloganeering, but very clear where a driving suggestion can make a difference. I think those triggers we need to really put into the policy. Thank you.
Bhargavi Rao's question: with neighborhood scale segregation patterns in India's major rural and urban centers, given the current situation, should we as researchers, academics and activists take up studies and also push the government for social mapping at the ward or Gram Sabha level and ensure the essentials will reach the distressed communities? Should we campaign and advocate for this in a strong way? This is the right time, and if not now, perhaps we will never be able to do it. Also, taking the word from PM's speech, where he said, look out for everyone around. He said that please take care of the poor families around you. So look out for everyone around, while he did not commit anything.
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very important. Many of us are disappointed with the academics in this country because the academics have really let the cause of the Dalits and Adivasis very, very, very down. I do not know why there is no prolific writing on the continuation of the Manuvadi systems. You still have segregation, very clear segregation. We don't need, but then where is the challenge coming from? All aspects are segregated. Even in the urban area, you only look at the names, the bastis. There's a Dalit basti, Harijan basti. Even in Arvind Kejriwal's Delhi, you have that. So, right, definitely. I think it was Praxis together. We have done a equity study on infrastructure, and we mapped where the infrastructure is. Every post office, every bank, every taluk office, every other administrative office are all located in the dominant caste villages in this country. Do we know that? And if that is so, even a small challenge of a youth from the Dalit community is not going to access these infrastructure. So, right, we need to do. And Prasad Chako will tell, in Kerala, the amount of discrimination that exists in the last flood, and even here, I was shocked. In Kerala, you have the Dalits don't have provision for water to wash their hands. I could not believe that. So there is an immense amount of concerned anti-Manuvadi research that needs to go on. I completely agree with Bhargavi Rao, and I think we need to form these, and really thank you for making these suggestions. Now, how we go about this, I'm sure we can. I'll be very happy. I will note this, and then we hope to connect. But it's not just me. I'm sure there are several others whom we need to take.
We have two more questions. The second last one. Thank you, Paul, by Abhay Raj Naik. Thank you, Paul, for the comments. Are there any meaningful alternatives to an overall strategy of resistance and solidarity from outside of power centers? Is there any potential, or are there possibilities in creatively sabotaging the existing Brahmanical patriarchal neoliberal regime while operating from within the system and using its own methods against it? Is there anything different or underexplored to be gained from Dalit, tribal, and indigenous feminisms?
The fact that you have tribal communities, Adivasi communities, who have not been destroyed, and their mind is very sharp and clear, and their mind, there are stories that I have heard in my own society. When I have rung up one of the persons who does this ironing, he was saying, "No, I'll manage. I don't need any money from you." And similar such stories we have been saying that they are not only able to survive, but they're also able to reach out among themselves. So first of all, Abhay Raj, I think we need to recognize the immense potential that they have, that despite all this banging, the kind of barrage of restrictions, the terrorizing that they are exposed to, they are still normal like you and me. I don't think if I'm subjected to this kind of life, I will not be normal. It's impossible. So for me, that itself is great. What is it that makes these communities who are being day in and day out, and see the COVID thing, the COVID thing. Can you think of walking for 100 kilometers? Can you think that they've challenged COVID? They've challenged the lockdown. We have not done it. Most of the middle class have not done it. They've given up. So somewhere, I think, first I need to recognize that this particular resilience exists within these communities. Of course, the second part is not to take advantage, not to co-opt them into the wrong thing. I may think that they're acquiescing. I may think that they're actually accepting all this nonsense, but I think they have a way in which they have to live. Your bedroom becomes the place of violence. Your own village, your own habitation becomes alien. You're considered an alien in your own country. You're considered an untouchable. So right from the beginning, to be having this kind of two existence, you're supposed to do this, but still you're polluted. No? So they're chasing all this, and with 10 years of protected being, they have produced. I'm from a Dalit background. Now, what has my grandfather, my grandmother, so the people are there. I think it is there. We need to recognize. But like Vijayan has said earlier and several other questions, I totally agree with you that we need to bring these to a different form of and sabotage their own doing. And how we do it, I don't know. But for me, that experience of that woman, and she has ability to.
Last question from Sampath Kale. Thank you so much, Paul, for having an interesting presentation. Paul, are you there? Yes. I think life and livelihood is equally important, but how do you analyze this in the larger context? Can you please throw some light on budgetary provisions if we have to reduce the existing inequalities and injustice?
I think I was looking at the packages. I think Prasad knows what are these relief packages that PM has announced. They are the existing packages repackaged, and they are the central government is telling the state governments, use the money that you already have. What is this? When countries are giving $3 trillion and all that, I do not know where this our mentality to see, but it's yet to be seen. I don't know. I think they will have bailouts for maybe Indigo, not Air India, but all these private airlines. Now all these airlines have crashed. They don't have any this thing. They might have bailout for Adani and Ambani in the loss of their things. But Sampath, I don't think we can expect this. This is somewhere I think we need to bring out, and we need to have, and this is a crucial, I'm sure CFA is already thinking of this. Joe and other colleagues, I think we need to really form a collaboration as to where you really watch, like what you have done in several other areas, like banks and others. Where is this money coming from? Is it an existing money? Is it a new money? How much others are getting? How much Dalit, Adivasis and distressed migrant communities are getting? And I think this is a challenge to you, Joe, and us as NCDHR and several of the Dalit organizations, Jan Sahas and several others. I think we need to really put our mind together and demand and visibilize this deception.
Thank you very much. And Jai Bhim, Paul, and all friends from CFA and all those who participated. The questions were very enlightening, and it did help us clarify a number of issues. No better tribute to Babasaheb Ambedkar than having had to remember him with great reverence and gratitude for the great constitution and the republic that he has given us. And I feel that it is that democracy and the ethos of democracy that the Constitution embodies, which has solutions to most of the problems that we see today. If we can go back to the Constitution and interpret it and reinterpret it from the values that Babasaheb and the Constituent Assembly had helped uphold it, I think we will have a lot of solutions that emerge. Before going to handing over to Joe and people at CFA, should I read out some interesting observations very fast from, just a moment, from Ashokda. Rulers get united much faster than the oppressed because their common interest is clear. That is to rule and rule ruthlessly. Yes, I think that is something which we have to keep in mind. And Bhargavi Rao says, thank you for the excellent session and giving us hope from the many anecdotes you mentioned. Maju Varghese, thank you, Paul, for this session and challenging people to see their locations they come from and to unite for a democratic society. Thanks for the story of the woman from Sarangpur who is an inspiration at these times.